The footage looked normal. That is what everyone said at first. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just another quiet night, captured on a fixed security camera behind a small office building. Black and white, slightly grainy, completely silent. The kind of footage no one ever pays attention to. The camera faced a narrow parking lot, 3 empty spaces, a large dumpster near the far edge, a single wall-mounted light flickering every few seconds, casting uneven shadows across the ground. The kind of place no one looks twice at. The timestamp read 2:58 a.m. The temperature that night had dropped to around 36 degrees, cold enough that the air felt heavy, cold enough that if anyone had been standing out there, their breath would have been visible in the dark. Outside the frame, trees lined the back of the property. Their branches moved slowly in the wind, brushing against each other in a dry, dragging motion that could not be heard on the footage, but somehow could be imagined just by watching. For nearly 20 minutes, the footage showed exactly what you would expect from an empty lot. Stillness, no cars entering, no people passing through, just the flickering light and the quiet outline of the building. At exactly 3:17 a.m., something changed. At first, it was almost impossible to notice. There was no movement leading into it, no figure walking into frame, no sound, no warning. There was simply something there that had not been there before. A figure, standing at the far edge of the camera's view. It did not step into frame. It did not arrive. It simply existed from one frame to the next. Investigators later reviewed the footage frame by frame. At 3:16:59, the space was empty. At 3:17, the figure was present. No transition, no motion, no explanation. The figure stood completely still, facing the building. Too far away to make out clear details, but close enough to confirm it was human in shape. And yet something about it felt wrong, because even when someone stands still, there are always small movements, a shift in posture, a slight tilt of the head, the natural motion of breathing. This figure did none of that. It did not move at all. For 43 seconds, it remained exactly the same. Then at 3:17:22, a light turned on inside the building. Second floor, far right window. The glow appeared suddenly, flickered once, then stabilized into a steady yellow light. The timing was precise, too precise. According to building records, the office had been empty for hours. Employees had left just after 7 p.m. Doors locked, alarm system armed, everything secured, and yet no alarm had been triggered, which meant someone inside had access, or someone had never left. Back outside, the figure remained, still, unmoving. The flickering wall light continued to cast uneven shadows. The wind moved faintly through the unseen trees behind the building. A loose piece of metal near the dumpster tapped softly in irregular intervals. Everything in the environment showed movement, except the figure. At exactly 3:17:43, it disappeared. Not by stepping away, not by walking out of frame. One moment it was there, the next moment it was gone. At 3:18 a.m., the light inside the building turned off. The parking lot returned to complete stillness. Later that morning, just after 9:30 a.m., an employee arrived at the building. The first thing they noticed was the front door, unlocked. That alone was unusual, but not enough to trigger immediate concern. Until they stepped inside, the air felt wrong, not dangerous, not threatening, just off, like something had happened, but left no visible sign. They contacted authorities. Officers arrived shortly after and conducted a full sweep of the building. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no damaged windows. Everything appeared normal until they reached the second floor, the same office where the light had turned on. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. Desks in place, equipment untouched, papers neatly arranged, but one detail stood out. A chair slightly pulled away from the desk, and beside it, a coffee cup, still warm, which meant someone had been sitting there minutes ago. But according to every camera, every access log, and every locked door, no one had entered the building. That contradiction changed everything. Investigators began working backward from that moment. If the coffee was still warm at 9:30 a.m., then someone had been inside the building shortly before discovery. but there were no records of entry, no badge access, no security logs, no alarms, which meant either the system had been bypassed or the person inside had legitimate access that left no trace. They examined the security system in detail. Every sensor was functioning, every access point recorded, no malfunctions, no resets, nothing had been triggered overnight. They returned to the footage again. 3:17 a.m., the figure, the light, the disappearance. They slowed it down further, enhanced contrast, zoomed into the edges of the frame. Still nothing changed. The figure did not move. It did not shift. It did not behave like someone standing in a parking lot. It behaved like something placed there, perfectly still, almost unnatural. Then, one detail stood out. At the moment the light turned on inside the building, the shadow beneath the figure did not change. That should not happen. Any shift in lighting should alter shadows on the ground, but the shadow remained exactly the same, which suggested something impossible. Either the lighting was not affecting the figure, or the figure was not interacting with the environment the way a normal person would. They pulled records going back several weeks, nothing unusual at first, until they found a report from a night cleaner. 2 weeks earlier, the cleaner had reported hearing footsteps on the second floor late at night. They assumed someone was working overtime, but when they checked, the floor was empty. At the time, it was dismissed. Now it wasn't. Investigators returned to the office. They analyzed the chair. It was not just pulled back. It was angled slightly toward the door, as if whoever had been sitting there had turned before standing, as if they had seen something, or someone. Then there was the coffee cup. No fingerprints, no usable DNA, which was unusual, because even in controlled environments, traces are almost always left behind. But this cup had none. They returned to the footage again, this time focusing on the window. At 3:17:22, when the light turned on, there was a faint movement inside, a shadow crossing the room, which meant someone had already been inside before the light came on. That changed the timeline completely. If someone was inside at 3:17 a.m. and still present around 9:30 a.m., then they had remained inside the building the entire time. But the building had been sealed. No exits, no entries, no alarms, no movement recorded. Search teams went through every part of the building again. Storage areas, maintenance rooms, ceiling spaces, nothing, no one, no signs of anyone hiding. Yet the evidence suggested presence, consistent presence, unexplained presence. The case began to draw outside attention. Specialists reviewed the footage, lighting experts, surveillance analysts, forensic technicians. They all reached the same conclusion. There was no visible way for the figure to enter or leave the frame, and no logical explanation for how someone could be inside the building without triggering any system. Then came the final detail, something investigators did not release publicly. The camera had captured a sound, not audible at normal levels, but detectable when the audio channel was enhanced. At exactly 3:17 a.m., when the figure appeared, there was a low-frequency shift, a subtle distortion in the recording. Not mechanical, not environmental, something else. It lasted less than a second, and never appeared again. No explanation was ever confirmed, no suspect identified, no one came forward. The building was eventually reopened, operations resumed. Nothing unusual was reported again, but the footage remains, archived, studied, unresolved, because it raises a question no one has been able to answer. If someone was inside that building, and no one ever saw them enter or leave, then how did they get there? And more importantly, are they the same figure that appeared at 3:17 a.m.? Subscribe for more true crime stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss what's next, because some stories don't just end. This is Forgotten Evidence, Buried Truth.